you are telling a young person, save up so that you are able to be financially free. Save up so that your kids are financially free. But how do we get to that point when you've got so many mouths looking at you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Andisa Liba. I am the host for Earnings Unleashed, a podcast designed to talk all things employee financial wellness and everything else in between. Today's podcast is brought to you by Floatpays, and to get in touch with the Floatpays team to understand more about their products and services, you can log on to www.floatpays.com. Alternatively, you can reach the team on email at support@floatpays.co.za. Today in studio with me to talk a little bit more about shaping leaders of the future, I've got with me Londiwe Mphala. Londiwe is, of course, the CHRO for the Competition Commission of South Africa. Londiwe, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me, Andisa.
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. We're still in the month of June. We want to anchor around Youth Day. Of course, as a country, we've just celebrated Youth Day and what that means for us. But before we get into that and sink our teeth in, for the benefit of our audience, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that the Competition Commission of South Africa does?
Okay, so as you indicated, Londiwe Mphala, I work for quite a dynamic organization called the Competition Commission of South Africa. So in the core of what we do is we investigate any companies that are in anti-competitive, that are involved in any anti-competitive behavior. We also look at merger regulation.
Talk to us a little bit about your role and I guess, a quick snippet of a day in the life of a CHRO at the Competition Commission.
Oh, wow. I don't think any day is the same. I could wake up this morning and think to myself, I'm about to implement my people management strategy. We're about to do dynamic and amazing things. And the next thing, you're dealing with a crisis where somebody is going through burnout, or somebody who just doesn't feel like coming to the office. But I think I'm in such a unique position in that at every moment, I get to engage and interact with people. And that's in the core of what fulfills me. And it's in the core of, I feel for me, my purpose. And my purpose is to be impactful in people's lives. So I'm in such a unique position where I'm able to do that. I do that and get paid to do it too, which makes it just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But I think if I could predict what I'm to do every day, I would certainly have the manual for a lot of crows on how to manage the dynamism of people within organizations.
Right. I love that so much. And I think it's so apt around the work that we do, to drive sustainable change in organizations as chief people officers. So today's conversations, we wanted to anchor it around shaping leaders of the future through wellness at work. Of course, a lot of the work that we do with our podcast and our organization is anchored around how do we unlock the pay potential of employees. And I think there's a bunch of different mental models that could be applied. And so we always, I think with keen interest, are looking for subject matter experts and leaders in different spaces to come in studio and to delve into the complexity of this topic. But I think before we do that, and perhaps for the benefit of our international audience, as South Africans in June 16, we commemorated Youth Day. Yeah. And essentially that is a marker in our calendar that pays tribute and homage to the young people of 1976 who stood up and rose and protested against the apartheid government. And so I think before we get into the nuts and bolts of our conversation, what does Youth Day mean for you as a young working professional? Because you are.
Absolutely. For me, the month of June always reminds me that I'm in such a position where I need to seize opportunities because of what the youth of 1976 did. It's the 1 month where I feel so confident. And again, it's because it reminds me of the unity. It reminds me of the resilience of the youth of that time with very little. but they made such a huge impact in changing our lives. And it also becomes quite a reflective month for me, in that what am I doing in my space to prepare the ground for the youth that will talk about the youth of this current year, or the youth of our time. What have we done if the youth of 1976 were able to leave such a history and were able to pave such a way? So it's also a month that, as much as it ignites a lot of confidence in me, but it also challenges me, because it does make me reflect that in everything that I do, whether it's at work or even in my social spaces, is it something that is preparing the next generation, or enabling them, or giving them that platform and that foundation? So it's a month full of a lot of emotions. And I love the conversations that usually take place during this month, to hear the different perspectives of the different generations of what this particular month means to them. And to an extent, when I hear the Gen Zs, I'm like, I'm slowly but surely being paved out of that youth in the workplace.
Right.
Maybe I no longer qualify as a young person in the workplace.
Sure.
But it's also a month that gives me a lot of gratitude. I mean, I got into a senior position. I was still falling within the youth bracket. So I got into a management position at that age. And had it not been the youth of 1976, would that have been a possibility for me? Would I have been in that kind of position? So that's the element of gratitude that then comes out in me when I think of Youth Month and how we celebrate it.
I love that so much, and I think it's so important that we don't lose sight of that. That there was a really heavy price that was paid, but I think an extension of that price is that we shoulder the moral obligation to move it forward, and so we can't rest on our laurels in and around issues around the youth. I think much like we're similar in terms of getting in that age bracket. And so there's so much for us to do as young leaders to shape the leaders of the future, but for us to reimagine what the world of work looks like, and also what the world of looks like through the lens of wellness. So love that. I want to stick with just this theme around youth. Unemployment in South Africa, by and large, is probably at its highest. In fact, it's at a staggering 59.7%, according to Stats SA. Really, really high and troubling number, that is. Considering that also the median age in South Africa is 27 years old. And so by and large, we've got a very young, society, right? And I guess my question is, are we doing enough to tap into this youth dividend that we have? Because it places us at a really interesting place, unlike the rest of the world. I mean, in fact, I read a study the other day that indicates that by the year 2030, Africans are going to be the youngest working population in the world. And there's something to be said about that. Hey, I mean, like, what are your thoughts, Lons?
Yeah, and maybe just to even add a spanner to that wheel, if we think about it, that age range of 27, I think even at the moment it's at its highest in terms of breadwinners.
100%.
How do we teach them financial wellness when they are also the breadwinners of our time because of the high unemployment? Now, we think about it, you are telling a young person, save up so that you are able to be financially free. Save up so that your kids are financially free. But how do we get to that? How do we get to that point when you've got so many mouths looking at you? In fact, I was listening to the radio as I was driving, and somebody said, at first I had that financial freedom because I had told myself that irrespective of the number of mouths that I am feeding, I will make sure that I put aside, whether it's a cent or so, but I found myself where I've had to go into my reserves. So the interest rates are not helping in bridging that gap.
Yeah.
It's now, what kind of tools do we bring into play? What is the workplace doing? Is the workplace cognizant of the fact that you've got a group that, yes, there is the independent group, there is also then that group that has got so many mouths to look after. And I think this is probably a problem that we face it's not peculiar to South Africa. When I was in Brazil, in fact, now we even extend the borders beyond. Yeah. And when I was in Brazil, my observation was when I looked at the workforce, it's definitely within that age range. And I thought to myself, if you've got such a dominance, and they were working, it would be your porters, it would be, and I thought to myself, does this mean you've got a big group that has now retired, early retirement? Is it because of high unemployment within that country too? And what does that then mean? It means that this young person is having to also then look after the siblings and also look after somebody who's got the potential to work, but they've had to go into early retirement because the system is making space for younger people because they can give more, they can bring out more. So it's a web. Yeah. It's a web that I myself don't even know how we would start to get ourselves out of it as a country, as a people, in fact, the world. Where do we even begin? Where do we even start?
And it's interesting that you bring that up, Londi, because I do share the same sentiment around the challenges that are more systemic than not. And I don't think there's a silver bullet to it either. I think there's an opportunity for us to have conversations around where is the opportunity in the chaos, right? I want to stay with this line of thought because you brought up something, and I want to bring up the term of black tax. And I think particularly in the brown community. And I don't think it's a conversation we need to shy away from. And you alluded to the social responsibilities that a lot of us shoulder, right? And so whilst, yes, we are working, in the centers of the country, but, really life for a lot of us is on the peripheral, right? Like we've got families in the coastal towns or in the smaller villages. Where can we find the opportunities, I think, to have more structured conversation, particularly around the black tax not even a conundrum. I mean, I think it's part of the fabric of our society, right? Like we've grown up knowing that we have to look after each other, which is why there's that African adage,
yes,
right?
Yes,
so our sense of community is actually the thing that anchors us as Africans, and yet there is still quite this divide between the have and have-nots, right? And a lot of it maybe starts with education at grassroots. Or it's somewhere along when we have, new hires that are younger, they're graduates. In fact, I think you run a graduate program. Is that correct?
Yes.
What are some of the thinking and I think some of the philosophies that you've embedded into your grad program to make it a successful tenure for those that participate?
Yeah. Before we even get them on board, so we for this particular cohort, we ran a whole boot camp. And part of the boot camp, we taught them financial planning. We had a module that said financial planning. So which means the 50 graduates that we took through the boot camp, as much as we were only looking for 17, we have left 50 graduates with key nuggets of how to plan your life, financially. And one of the things that, we emphasized, we said, you're probably the first person to graduate and get an opportunity. That means you now have to start thinking about your contribution to groceries. You need to start thinking about your contribution to the upkeep of the household. To an extent, you may say to yourself, this is unfair. I didn't ask to be born. Why am I now faced with? But again, to the point that you raise around Ubuntu, you will not allow yourself to shy away from it.
Right.
But one of the things we said to them, we said, empower them differently. Those that are dependent on you. How do you empower them differently? Leverage on their strengths. If you know your mother is able to sell, say, Mom, I'm going to go buy you stock so that you can go and sell something.
Right.
If you've got a brother who is good at either graphics or whatever it is that they are good at, you say, I'm going to go buy you paintbrushes because you need to be able to come back as well and contribute to us sustaining this household. And you must be bullish around the amount that you put aside every month.
Yeah.
And we even said to them, it can even start at 100 Rand. Don't think that a savings is defined as a huge lump sum monthly. And this is where we lose it. I mean, we've seen on Facebook where you've got that piggy and they tell you put 1 rand and, by the time it's December, you're going to have 1,000 rand or whatever it is that you'll have. But it's really teaching the fundamentals of knowing what to do with the little that you get. And you telling us that the stipend that you get from the graduate program is not sufficient and doesn't leave enough for you to save. You will never have enough. You can never get to a point where you say, I have enough, now I can start putting it aside. Yeah. But if you've trained yourself and you've embedded that kind of behavior, it becomes so seamless. And the reason why we also have those conversations is because from being a graduate to being one of our juniors in the organization, it's a huge jump financially. It's almost like double their salary, if not 3 times their salary. And we found that those who have not been taken through this vigorous financial awareness boot camp of sorts, come the 3rd month of their appointment as a junior, they are asking for advances. And you say, but you were used to living with the little. How did you get to such a spike so quickly? And we realized this is where the gap was.
I love that philosophy. And in fact, I applaud you guys as an employer for that level of nobility, because there aren't enough employers that walk that journey intentionally, with actual tangible tools. So outside of the education, the education, yes, is important. In fact, against, our counterparts, the rest of the world, South Africans are considered to be 54%, my apologies, illiterate. And so our understanding of money instruments and what these money instruments can do to yield the right positive results is often misunderstood. And so I love that you've caught them early on before they start having, these behaviors around money and their relationship with money. I want to talk to you about, you touched on it very nicely now, I guess your philosophy around creating a rewards ecosystem, right? And granted, in the context of this conversation, in this example, is through the graduate program. What are your thoughts in expanding that to the rest of the organization in terms of reframing what compensation support looks like outside of the more traditional models that we've learned to know? Yeah.
In fact, it's one of the things that we are looking into. We realize that the age range is now, our average age is sitting at about 35 now, the rest of the organization. And we thought, how do we creatively assist now from a pension perspective? Because that's where we are able to assist them. We are doing a little bit of research around potentially being able to give you a little bit more as well if you add a little bit more. So, of course, there's the legislated certain percent that you must contribute, but we are considering on doing more, because doing more is a reflection of setting yourself up for the future. And I think we are also exploring other providers who would be able to assist us with repackaging even the employees' packages. So looking at if they have a savings of sort, would they be able to access that savings? If not, what is the benefit of adding certain interest to it? Can we top up the interest, or do we say that you'd be able to take the component that you make and we add the interest component? So we're trying to be creative around our benefit structure, and part of the benefit structure is the promotion of savings, because we do want that financial wellness, because it leads to a lot of things.
Absolutely.
You would then find that, hence there's also the rise in mental health, because people are finding it difficult to sustain themselves with what they have. And if you are creating other platforms and other avenues to be able to sustain yourself, it may alleviate the burden just a little bit more. We don't guarantee it will do it 100%, but I think to an extent it could try.
I love that because it's so important to understand the different tenets that lead to financial wellness. And it's never really a one size fits all. I think for some organizations, it needs to be a one size fits one. And so what may work with your graduate program may not necessarily work for your mid-career hires who are fundamentally at a different place in their life. They might have a little bit more responsibilities and family, et cetera, et cetera. I want to go back to to the conversation around, I think youth and credit lines. And I asked this question, I think particularly in a system where our reliance on credit almost dictates the quality of our life. Right? So your ability to have a good credit score, to go and purchase a car, to nowadays, if you want to be a tenant, right? Like they'll do a background check. Can you really afford to pay for your place? Have you demonstrated good financial discipline?
Yeah.
Right? So are you a good custodian of money? What role do you think us as leaders and employers play in the space, if any at all?
Education on even the right type of debt. Some youth think, I need to build up my credit score. Let me go get a Truworths account. Is that good debt? That's not good debt. So it's that education of advising them on what is good debt that will help your credit score and what to do with that debt.
Sure.
Once you've acquired it, right? Give yourself a timeline. So it's the education, it's the relatable education around this is good debt. How do you clear that good debt?
Yeah.
What timelines do you give yourself to clear that good debt? And how long should you have that kind of debt? So once you've secured something and you can see that your credit score is now stable, do away with it.
Yeah.
You don't need it. You don't need it. And it needs a lot of self-awareness. And I think this is where, as human capital practitioners, we actually come in.
Yeah.
Because if a person knows what their triggers are, quickly close it. If you know when you're stressed, you decide to go to Truworths or you go to Foschini, close that account. Because you will have triggers.
Sure.
But know what it then leads you to. So this is where we come in as the workplace to ensure that there is that continuous education that is relatable. So don't come in and talk about if you take on a car. I mean, if you decide to go and buy an expensive bag, for instance, and put it on credit, it will show that you're able to pay off 70,000 rands. But are you going to be happy having that bag costing 70,000 rands in your wardrobe? Your credit score is happy, but are you happy?
Right.
Because you're going to hit a slump and think about that 70,000 rands bag that is in your cupboard. And there's nothing you can do about it. So the education of the proper kind of debt is what we are not doing enough about. I think we're coming in at the tail end. We're coming in at the end of how do you get yourself out of debt?
Yeah.
But before I got myself there, why don't you educate me on the types of debt?
Yeah.
And I feel even when I started working, that was the part that was missing from an education perspective.
Yeah,
if my employer said to me, Londi, you now are earning X, Y, and Z, bring in your financial advisors. At that point, your financial advisors should be telling me that if I'm saving X, Y, and Z, by the time I retire, this is how much I will have. And they should even go to the extent of saying to me, beyond saving for pension, you want to live a comfortable life.
Correct.
Have a flexible budget. And flexible budget is not when you want to go splurge, you now move things around. No, flexible budget looks at what do the interest rates, what does the economic climate look like at that point in time? Because some of us are still working with budgets of 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Things have gone up.
Yeah,
and
the cost of living is just astronomical.
It's crazy. But we're not revisiting our budgets.
Yeah.
How often do you there's a guy who talks about financial wellness online. I've just forgotten his name. But he was saying, as much as you review projects at work, you need to learn to review your budgets on a quarterly basis.
Yeah.
Because you may find by Q4, so have quotas as well, you'll find that by Q3 or Q4, you've spent so much money on things that you actually did not need.
Yeah.
Then the turnaround time takes much longer because you've discovered late.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it quarterly, you're able to discipline yourself and say, hey, hold on, I shouldn't have been spending on this. How do I turn things around? So had I been told those things, had I been educated, had my employer at the time been proactive in giving me this information, I certainly think that from a savings perspective, I would have been far.
Yeah.
But I discovered the information a little bit later and I tried to catch up. again, I said to myself, you're not going to catch up to the extent that you want, but you're going to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what's important.
And it's so hard to reverse engineer debt cycles.
Absolutely.
And so you're quite correct in saying, the right course of action is to ensure that you give people empowerment tools, right, to help circumvent them sinking into those debt traps, because it really is difficult to come out of it and to even come out of it unscathed. The cost of living, and I think if you look at some of the empirical data that suggest that people are spending so much of their income servicing debt, right? So every month people are oscillating between paying Peter or Paul and vice versa the following month. So how do we break those cycles by ensuring that they don't occur in the first place? And if anything else, what I'm hearing from you is that I think as employers, we've got a moral obligation in the workplace to, as the youth would say, enter the chat. Enter the chat a lot sooner.
Yes,
right?
enter the chat.
And not allow for people to swim so far down the river that saving them just feels like such a mammoth task. And I often hear it from leaders who say, I don't really want to get involved in our employees' financial stuff. Because at that point, they're so far gone that it's so much harder. It's so much more. I mean, the cost of doing it is just that much more. So thank you for that reminder that, as leaders, we really do have that moral obligation from a social impact perspective to give people the right tools of enablement much earlier on in their journey.
But I think also on productivity, what we don't realize is that when they are so far in debt, it reduces their level of productivity. So yes, you are also impacted. It's not only on a moral moral grounds, but
it hits your bottom line.
Too.
It hits your bottom line.
And to then get to a point where you say, I can't help you. You are at the point where this is not working out because your productivity levels have declined. But had you empowered me at the beginning, it would be a different story.
Sure.
And I get to a point where if I'm asking for advances over and over and over, at the beginning of my first advance, that conversation should have happened. You can't be now telling me when I'm asking for advance number 4 that maybe we need to go for financial counseling. You should have counseled me from the beginning on what the ripple effects will be already when I take my first one and what that means. So it's that those early detection signs that I think it becomes a challenge even to human capital practitioners to be on the lookout for and empower the leaders in the organization to be having those conversations as well. So if it gets brought to you as human capital, you can have a broad conversation.
Sure.
And of course, invoke your wellness providers, etc., and bring in the specialists. But if the line manager is also talking the same language, it goes deeper.
Yeah.
It cements it. It cements the message and really turns around the entire situation.
And that's so important, I think, to call out, because if you look at a macroeconomic perspective, it's costing our economy 2% of our GDP in an unproductive workforce. And so the dangers with not calling it out, and I think capacitating leaders to have the right conversation, is that you then end up with bums on seats. So you have people who are physically there, but they're on solitaire and they're doing the maths in their head that, oh my gosh, when I get paid and payday comes around, like, who am I not going to pay? And they're constantly, wrestling with those kinds of things. And so from a productivity perspective, then you're not getting the best out of your employees. They're unhappy. They are not focused. And there's probably errors that can be avoided that keep as regular occurrences in the system. And you don't quite know how to unlock that. And so I really think it's important, I think, from an education perspective, that we educate our leaders around this from a macroeconomic perspective. Like, amazing. Speaking of, I think, systemic changes and I guess impact, Londi, how can we as leaders, I think, change the world of work where financial wellness is concerned? So we've talked about some practical things. I like the term that you coined, and you said it has to be, what did you call it? It was practical.
Relatable.
Relatable. There we go. That's the term. Relatable information. All right. And for me, I think it also speaks to deconstructing language, and particularly for those of us who don't have English as a first language, right?
Yeah.
So you're constantly coding and decoding, and sometimes you code and decode, to a fault.
Yeah.
And I guess, where is the opportunity in and around, I think, rethinking maybe some of the providers that we are using, so perhaps we've got access to an ecosystem of providers, but perhaps they're not a good fit, because there's also that, hey?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, this sounds like a psychometrics discussion where the big debate is it inclusive? Is it representative of the country? Is it representative? So I couldn't agree with you more, Andisa, in that we certainly can do more in that space. We can do more by breaking it down, understanding different peculiar situations. And maybe this is where the conversation of artificial intelligence comes in. Because what should be fed to me is information that talks to my circumstance.
Right.
And I should be able to come to you and say, this is my peculiar circumstance. And then it gives me a solution. Because we may think we have a broad solution, but it doesn't speak to my unique circumstance.
Yeah.
We've spoken broadly on black tax, on young people, etc. But there could be more dynamics. You could be looking after, in fact, you could have a lump sum of money that
Sure.
you've now all of a sudden come across. What do you do with it?
Right.
But if we had a tool that enables you to indicate where am I financially, an assessment. So it's not a broad brush. And in that way, the solutions are targeted, they are specific, and they speak to me as an individual.
Yeah.
And I'm likely to commit to something that speaks to me. I'm likely to want to see it to finish, something that speaks to me, because I'm not going to say, well, this is how somebody else would typically deal with it. So I can choose what I take from this advice.
Yeah.
And this is where we lose it. You get a whole offering of advice, but you only pick one bit. And that one bit may not help you for the end game.
Yeah.
But it's because you've picked what is more relatable to you, which is a problem. So I think with financial services or institutions that offer products, they need to think about how they extract personalized data to be able to give the personalized product offerings.
Yeah. And I suppose this is where technology as an enablement tool is really critical, and how you marry that with the right philosophies and mental models
Absolutely.
to reach dynamism in the outcomes. Because I think we all of us, we are all in very different stages of our financial journeys, right? Depending on circumstance, depending on, a poor decision making along the way, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many verticals that impact sometimes how someone can be seen as someone who is financially unwell.
Yeah.
And so how do you then find the opportunity to unlock that, but ultimately give them the right subset of tools to help them overcome that? I love that you highlighted, and I love the word commitment, because I think a lot of the conversation around finance requires that muscle and that discipline, right? And a lot of it to say, if I'm going to save, whether it is 100 Rand or 200 Rand, right? It is that show of commitment. So how do I show up for myself in the context of my financials? And I think there's a whole school of thought that needs to be unpacked around the psychology of money, and how do we get people to understand the importance of commitment, because often, money comes into the checking account on the 25th or whatever the date you get paid, and it is right out.
It's right out.
It's right.
It comes in.
It's right out. And maybe staying with that line of thought. What are your thoughts around paycheck linked savings platforms that help people who have trouble maintaining that consistent discipline. And for some, it could be FOMO, right? It could be that I saw you with the Louis Vuitton bag, and now I want one. And now all of a sudden, I lose my footing and I lose my financial strategy because I'm now socially influenced by the world that I exist in. So, what are your thoughts around having something a little bit more structured, where it circumvents that lack of discipline?
No, I am in total agreement of products of that nature, because what it does is it becomes less administrative for you. And apart from the reduction of administration, subconsciously, you forget about it. And forgetting about it is good, because if you get tempted for that Louis Vuitton bag, you're not going to be thinking about, you're going to take it as a debit order, right? And what you'll be looking at is what's left in your account. And what's left in your account, thankfully, would then have subtracted your savings. Then you'll realize, actually, I can't afford that Louis Vuitton bag.
Right.
Then you start having that conversation of, if I can't afford it, I can't have it. And if I like the design, I can get myself something that is within my affordability bracket. As simple as that. So I like the discipline that it forces. Because it's discipline for a good cause.
Correct.
You're going to be the beneficiary of that discipline. It's not harsh discipline. It's one of the good types of discipline.
In a world where consumerism is probably at its height, just in terms of the stuff that we're consuming and our need to feed the beast. And that is a beast of on demand. I want it, and I want it now. Right, and we see in how we engage with products and platforms, right? If I wanted lunch delivered to the studio, I can whoop up my Uber Eats, right? And food is here in 15 minutes tops. Or if I need to order something else. How do we challenge conventional wisdom around how packages are structured? Because I think the way we live our lives isn't necessarily nowadays aligned to our pay cycles. Right. So we get paid once a month because for most organizations, it's economical to run a payroll in that fashion. But it's not necessarily fit for purpose, right? Like we're at the petrol station once a week filling up our cars. We're buying bread every other day if you have a reasonable sized household. And so consumerism is also pivoting how we engage with with what we've earned within a cycle. Is there an opportunity to challenge traditional wisdom?
There is. As you're talking, I'm thinking of a friend of mine who every month end, she withdraws her salary and puts money in envelopes. Each envelope is labeled what the purpose of that envelope is. And once that money runs out of that envelope, that's it. It's done. She can't do nothing. So if she wanted to go and buy something online, her online envelope, if it's finished, it's it. And again, it goes back to the issue of discipline. Now, imagine if we had virtual envelopes. So if you could, I'm not going to go around carrying money and, with these different types of envelopes. But what I liked is the principle around what she's doing.
So essentially like e-wallets of sorts,
like
for different things.
So she knows this is the envelope for the kids. And this is the envelope for my entertainment. This is the envelope for household things. This is the envelope for going out. This is the envelope, but it's there. It's segmented. And she knows where to draw from. And I really found it to be smart, because if we had something that was virtual, that's like that, you would know that this is the card I'm using, or this is what I select on the platform when I'm swiping.
Right.
If I can't swipe anymore, that's it. I'm done. So it's. I think we need to start thinking of, again, those in opportune positions to think of such innovative ways to help embed that discipline. It would really, really, really go a long way. Because a person would know that this is as far as I can go. But also it's teaching that it's the emphasis on self-awareness. We don't realize how much of a role it plays in our financial spending.
Yeah.
If you are so self-aware, you would be able to say, as much as I desire something, I know when to say no to my desire. So at what point do we teach that? At what point do we promote that? Do we immediately get into, let's talk about my paycheck? Or should we rather be saying, let's talk about the self? You must know yourself, and you must know what your threshold is. And you must know at what point do you fall off the wagon?
Right.
And how do you get yourself back onto the wagon?
Yeah.
So it's that importance of self-awareness, because it will help you drive to the direction that you need to be driving. And you will have moments, don't be hard on yourself as well. You'll have moments where you fall off. But it's how quickly do you then get yourself back onto that straight and narrow path in your financial journey.
Yeah. So by and large, it really does sound like there's a great opportunity for creating that structure and an ecosystem for people to then start structuring their money and their spend and their allocation in different pods, if you will, or different e-wallets or whatever they call it, to help build in some of that discipline that is so desperately required.
Yes. And when somebody makes money from that, royalties.
Wow.
You heard the idea here first.
You heard it here first on Earnings Unleashed, coming straight from Londiwe. Londiwe, this has been such a great, rich conversation. I think it's a necessary conversation to continue to have. Of course, we both know that there isn't a silver bullet around some of these challenges. There are pockets of opportunities that exist in the horizon. A lot of the work that you guys do with the Competition Commission is that you've got an aerial view of other organizations. What are some of the other practical examples that you are seeing from what the other organizations are attempting to make financial inclusion a possibility for their workers?
So part of the work that we do is looking at merger control. And the considerations when we look at merger control is public interest issues and, of course, then the competition-related issues. And under the public interest issues, some of the factors we consider or some of the factors that we would tell organizations to consider before we even approve a merger is employee share schemes. Because in that way, you're giving your employees some financial freedom, but you're also giving them a stake in the organization. So those are some of the things that we would put in the conditions before we approve a merger. And again, this is about financial inclusion. This is about expanding that pie around financial inclusion. But the responsibility, in my view, where the employer comes in is that once you've done that, there needs to also be education. So yes, we can enforce that as the Competition Commission, and you basically do it as a tick box exercise, and you find that then they go down a rabbit hole because you're not educating them about the value of it and what it actually means. So I think I'm hoping that when organizations undertake to do so, when they've been granted the mergers, that they genuinely educate their employees so that they have a full-on understanding and an appreciation of what this actually means. So I think the Commission is very much centered around, of course, protection of jobs, but it's also to promote deconcentration in the economy and, protecting consumers. And I think part of protection is that financial muscle. It's building that financial muscle, because if as consumers we have the appreciation of what financial resilience meant, I think certainly our economy would be different to what it is right now.
Right. And that's so important, I think, to also be in that space where we make allowances for unorthodox thinking. And a lot of the work that we do as Floatpays, right, is also centered around deconstruction of what traditional mental models dictate around pay and pay structures. Well, that brings us to the close of our conversation. Londiwe, thank you so much for your generosity and for allowing us to lean into your wisdom as a leader. Again, I think there's so many opportunities, I think, for us to unpack what's possible, to partner with employers and employees on their journey of unlocking the pay potential of their people. This podcast was, of course, brought to you by Floatpays. Our podcast is called Earnings Unleashed. And for more information on Floatpays and what we do, you can go to www.floatpays.com. Alternatively, you can reach out to our team at support@floatpays.co.za. And from me, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Londiwe.